Okay, it's 3:15. Welcome back, everyone, to our fourth quarter of this amazing program today. And it's a tremendous pleasure, as well as an honor, to present to you two people who don't really need an introduction. First of all, Shanti Jones is well known to us. Shanti's a Ph.D. philosophical counselor, educator, performer, whose work bridges philosophy, psychology, and spiritual practice. She's based in Taos, New Mexico, has spent over 40 years helping people become the subject of their own lives through various kinds of modalities. She's very well known to the philosophical community here and abroad for her work. And she is now teamed up with Professor Andrew Fitz Gibbon, a SUNY Distinguished Service Professor and Professor of Philosophy at Cortland, a sister institution to CUNY, and his academic interests are very diverse: ethics, nonviolence, love, philosophical practice, somaesthetics, and he's authored or edited 20 books, book chapters, and articles in all kinds of journals. He's an editor of a series with Brill, and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, of course, a fellow of APA. And he's got a new book on Tai Chi that I just reviewed and highly recommend. I've just endorsed it, rather, and it will be coming out soon. And Andy, if you want to plug that book, you'll be more than welcome. The title of their joint presentation is The Moral Third: Love, Virtue, and the Ethics of the Between. So without further ado, the floor is yours. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Lou. Can everyone hear me? And you can see my screen? Okay. So I do want to start by thanking Lou and the other members of the board for their support of my work over the last 12 years. I wouldn't be where I am in the thinking of my work without your help and support. And also Andrew for the response today to my current work on the moral third, which was inspired by his book, Love is a Guide to Morals. And I'd also like to thank my fellow APA members also for their offering my support for my work and by contributing their attention and comments to it. Let's see, why isn't it going down? Okay, just a minute. So the presentation structure is I'm going to offer the opening theoretical framework, and I'm going to offer case study and clinical conclusions. And the focus will be on the moral third as an ethical relational field. And then after 15 minutes, I'll turn the floor over to Andrew, and he'll give his response to my paper. So first of all, I'd like to start out by defining the moral third. The moral third is not another person. It's a shared ethical reality that emerges between people. Jessica Benjamin observed that many relationships become trapped in what she calls the doer-done-to dynamic. In that state, one person experiences themselves as right and the other as wrong. One is victim and the other is perpetrator. The moral third represents a different possibility, a shared commitment to something larger than either person's immediate values and wishes. It allows both partners to remain subjects rather than reducing one another to objects. The question shifts then from who is right to what is happening between us. The moral third creates a space where conflict can be held without domination, submission, or withdrawal. It is therefore not merely psychological, it is ethical. It is the field within which genuine dialogue, accountability, and repair become possible. But if the moral third is an ethical space, what exactly gives that space its moral character? Love is not simply a feeling. It is a practice sustained by virtue. Contemporary culture often treats love as emotion, chemistry, attraction, or compatibility. These experiences matter, but they are not sufficient to sustain a relationship. Benjamin describes the moral third as an ethical achievement rather than a spontaneous emotional state. I am proposing that the moral third is best understood as love enacted through virtue. Virtues are stable dispositions that allow us to remain in relationship when emotions fluctuate. Courage allows difficult truths to be spoken. Fairness prevents us from collapsing into self-righteousness. Attentiveness allows us to perceive the other's experience. Forgiveness and reparation make recovery from injury possible. Without these capacities, love becomes fragile because it depends entirely upon feeling. With them, love becomes a practice that can survive disappointment, conflict, and vulnerability. This understanding of love and virtue places Benjamin within a much larger philosophical conversation. Benjamin's moral third draws together several traditions concerned with sharing shared human meaning. For example, Aristotle reminds us that flourishing occurs through the cultivation of virtue within relationships and communities. Martin Buber contributes the idea of the between, the I-thou encounter where genuine presence becomes possible. Winnicott's transitional space describes an intermediate realm where creativity and relationship emerge. Gadamer emphasizes dialogue as a fusion of horizons rather than a victory of one perspective over another. McIntyre situates virtue within shared practices and moral traditions. Ricoeur shows how narrative identity develops through the stories we tell together about ourselves and our lives. Heidegger's concept of being with suggests that relationality is not optional, but part of human existence itself. Benjamin brings these strands together clinically. The moral third can be understood as the lived ethical field where virtue, dialogue, recognition, and shared meaning converge. If this is true, then relational suffering is not simply an intrapsychic problem. Many relationship crises are actually failures of shared ethical space. Couples often arrive in counseling focused on symptoms, conflict, resentment, sexual difficulties, emotional distance. Beneath these symptoms, we frequently find a collapse of the moral third. Each person retreats into a private truth. Recognition gives way to defensiveness. Dialogue turns into persuasion, accusation, or silence. The relationship no longer functions as a shared moral project. At this point, suffering is not merely psychological, it is relational and ethical. Philosophical counseling is uniquely positioned to address this problem because it works explicitly with meaning, values, virtues, and responsibility. The task is not to determine who is correct. The task is to help participants re-enter a shared field where truth can be spoken, heard, and transformed into mutual understanding. Once that ethical space is restored, many practical difficulties become more workable. To illustrate what a collapse of the moral third looks like in lived experience, I want to turn now to Robert and Bonnie and a dream that revealed the hidden structure of their relationship. This is not a crisis relationship. It is a relationship that had been slowly diminishing through silence. Robert and Bonnie had been together for 4 years. There was no dramatic betrayal, abuse, or obvious conflict. From the outside, the relationship looked relatively stable, yet both partners were becoming increasingly isolated from one another. Robert felt frustrated, sexually inhibited, and unable to speak openly. Bonnie struggled with body image concerns and gradually withdrew from physical intimacy. Each was suffering privately. Neither wanted to hurt the other. Their efforts to protect the relationship paradoxically prevented the honest conversations the relationship needed. This is often how the collapse of the moral third begins, not through hostility, but through avoidance. The relationship becomes organized around maintaining peace rather than pursuing truth. The central question becomes, what happens when preserving harmony begins to cost vitality? The unconscious often recognizes these dynamics before the conscious mind does. Robert's dream dramatizes a sacrifice made in the name of preservation. Robert dreams that he amputates Bonnie's leg in order to save her life. In the dream, the decision initially appears necessary and justified. Bonnie later returns healed and functioning. Everything seems fine on the surface. Then Robert touches her body and suddenly realizes what has been lost. He experiences the absence directly. At that moment, he becomes overwhelmed. He retreats into a bathroom and holds the door shut while hyperventilating. The emotional center of the dream is not the surgery itself. It is the moment of recognition. Something essential has been sacrificed. What initially appeared to be a solution is revealed as a profound loss. The dream presents the emotional truth before Robert could articulate it consciously. But what exactly had been amputated? Robert's dream symbolizes a relationship preserved through self-silencing. The leg can be understood as a symbol of movement, vitality, agency, and relational aliveness. Robert had unconsciously accepted a diminished relationship in order to avoid risking conflict or rejection. The relationship survived, but at a cost. Desire, spontaneity, and honest dialogue had been gradually sacrificed. The panic in the dream occurs when he recognizes that the loss is real. Benjamin writes that domination and submission are often co-created attempts to maintain attachment. Robert's silence was not simply avoidance, it was an effort to preserve connection, yet what was preserved was increasingly hollow. The dream exposes the tragic paradox. We can sometimes protect a relationship from rupture while simultaneously draining it of life. The moral third collapses when preservation becomes more important than truth. The therapeutic task then becomes restoring the ethical space where truth can safely emerge. The intervention focuses less on solving the problem and more on restoring the moral third. Rather than determining who was responsible for the sexual disconnection, we shifted attention to the relationship itself. The problem was no longer located inside Robert or Bonnie. The problem belonged to the shared field between them. This immediately reduced blame and defensiveness. The focus became creating conditions for mutual recognition. I invited both partners to examine what they feared would happen if they spoke honestly. We explored the virtues needed for that conversation, virtues such as courage, fairness, attentiveness, humility, and care. The intervention was fundamentally ethical rather than technical. The goal was not simply better communication. The goal was reestablishing a shared commitment to truth, even when truth felt risky. Several practical movements were necessary for that shift to occur. There are 5 movements that I describe in which the restoration of the moral third can occur. First, you shift from moving from private suffering to a shared inquiry. How are we creating this together? Then you decenter, stepping away from the blame so that neither person becomes the problem. The partners must speak from personal experience and replace accusation with self-disclosure. Then they have to encounter the other as a subject with a valid perspective. And they must also realize that recognition does not necessarily require agreement. And lastly, they have to cultivate and practice the virtues that sustain difficult dialogue. The moral third, as we all know, is maintained through ongoing ethical effort. Together, these movements create the conditions for relational transformation. They move the couple from opposition towards collaboration. Once this process begins, an important threshold becomes visible. The crucial threshold is the willingness to risk truth for the sake of deeper connection. The greatest danger in this case was not conflict, it was continued silence. Silence protected attachment in the short term while undermining it in the long term. When dialogue reopened, both partners experienced greater freedom and agency. The relationship became capable of holding complexity rather than avoiding it. Benjamin describes this movement as an escape from the doer-done-to structure. Each partner becomes capable of influencing and being influenced. The relationship becomes a shared moral project once again. The transformation was not that every disagreement disappeared. The transformation was that the couple recovered a space in which disagreement could be engaged constructively. The moral third restored vitality because it restored mutual recognition. To conclude, what this case illustrates is that the moral third is not merely a theoretical concept. It is a clinically observable reality. When it collapses, relationships become constricted and defensive. When it is restored, dialogue, agency, and love become possible again. Thank you. Turn it to Andrew.
Thank you, Shanti, for that. I don't have a PowerPoint, so I'm just going to talk. Are you still seeing my face, Lou, at this moment?
Yes, you're absolutely fine.
Okay, good. So I want to begin by expressing appreciation to Shanti for letting me see the paper, and then for inviting me to make a response to it. And what strikes me most is not simply that Shanti used my work, because we do that all the time, scholars, we work from each other. But what really interested me was that she took it and made a very creative way extending it. So as philosophical practitioners, I think we all share the conviction that philosophy ought not to remain confined to journals or conferences or classrooms. It ought to help human beings live better lives. And I think that what Shanti's doing in taking my work on love and then making an application of it to philosophical practice is actually very creative. And as part of that, we invited her to apply to become a visiting scholar at SUNY Cortland in the Center for Ethics, Peace and Social Justice, and the university just appointed her to that. So for this next year, Shanti's going to be working on a book that arises out of this paper, and I'll be working with her. And just as an aside, I'm not quite sure why, but our university has been very friendly to philosophical practice for a long time. We did an IRB-approved research project, Susan, that would be of interest to you. And then we used the case studies of that. Another colleague of mine who retired, inviting Lou and Warner to SUNY Cortland. We had a very nice time together. Our provost approved my work in philosophical counseling, so I could actually use my office. And invite faculty and staff and community members to come to the office. Even establishing an IFR account, so if anybody paid me for philosophical counseling, then that would go through the university. Of course, they would take an 18% cut. It's the university, but they do that kind of thing. And I have to say, when the pandemic came, I said to the president, look, I'll do the counseling for free. It's a pandemic. And I've never actually charged anybody since. So I don't know if that's letting the profession down. And now Shanti's a visiting scholar. And specifically, the narrative that she wrote was as a philosophical practitioner. And she wanted to do further research. So we still have that kind of friendliness, which I gather is not always true of other universities, where there's some kind of resistance to the kind of work we do. But what Shanti does is she takes my book that I wrote, published in 2012, Love as a Guide to Morals. I've been working on it for the previous 7 years. And in that book, and this is what Shanti wanted me to explain a little bit about how I got to Love as a Guide to Morals, I argued that love should be taken as a serious moral concept. And it began with a challenge that I read from Iris Murdoch, who observed that philosophers had largely abandoned love as a central moral character category. I found her criticism persuasive, and I wanted to explore what love would look like if it once again became a guide to ethical reflection. One of the difficulties that I found was the tendency within both philosophy and theology to identify one particular form of love as the only genuine love. So other forms of love were not genuine. And this was most often understood as agape from the New Testament, understood as selfless, altruistic, or divine love. And the result was that many of the ordinary loves that shape human life were marginalized and treated as morally suspect. Especially Eros, that was certainly morally suspect. So my own approach was pluralistic. I followed thinkers such as Alan Sobel, Irving Singer, Robert Wagner, C.S. Lewis, argued that human love appears in many forms. Erotic love, friendship, affection, compassion, familial attachment, other forms of caring are all part of the landscape of human experience. And so rather than reducing them to a single form, I sought to understand the interconnectedness of all those different ways of thinking about love. Now, what Shanti has done is she's taken that discussion in a new direction. She asked, what happens when love is understood not simply as a feeling, a desire or relationship, but as the creation and maintenance of what she has called the moral third? So in her account, love becomes an ethical space between persons. It becomes a field of mutual recognition sustained by virtues. And I find that both original and quite compelling, which is why I've offered to work with Shanti as she develops the idea. Now, at the same time, 20 years later, from Love as a Guide to Morals, I would want to make several modifications to that earlier framework that I had. I'm going to mention just two of them. The first is based on the notion of the virtues in the book. Shanti mentions them in a full paper. There are 12. And I would probably extend my treatment of love. I, for instance, missed out two kinds of love that I would want to include now, which people, when they read and critiqued the book, they said this is a lack, and I actually agree with them. In the book, I treated parental love largely as a form of affection. And whilst there's truth in that description, I now believe it was insufficient. Parental love is not simply affection directed towards your kids. It also involves responsibility, vulnerability, sacrifice, attachment, and care over extended periods of time. And that subsequent engagement I had with thinking about parental love, especially using the ethics of care, the work of Nell Nodding, Sarah Ruddick, Virginia Held, and also the insights of John Bowlby and attachment theory, that made me rethink parental love. Parental love is a kind of love all on its own. And so if I was looking at the work again, and I think Shanti knows my book better than I do, to be honest, if I wrote the book again, I would have parental love as its own. And then the second one was patriotic love. And I was asked, well, what about patriotic love? You know, it's a real, the person that asked me said, this is a real problem. And it does present a different challenge altogether. It's, say, unlike parental love, it's not directed primarily toward a person, but toward a community, a people, a history, a shared way of life. But patriotic love has always occupied an ambiguous space in my own thinking. On the one hand, there seems to be something admirable about loving one's country, caring for its well-being, accepting responsibilities towards the political community that has shaped you. And that's all to the good. But on the other hand, and sadly, we're seeing this increasingly, history has repeatedly shown how easily patriotic love can become distorted into forms of nationalism that divide people into insiders and outsiders and elevate one group above another group, justify exclusions, hostility, violence. And yet it's love. And that, as someone that's interested in the philosophy of love as a guide to morals, is a bit problematic. So that philosophical question continues to interest me. whether there can be a form of patriotic love analogous to friendship or familial love, perhaps one that seeks the good of the community while remaining open to criticism, having some kind of humility and concern for the wider human family. And I say that as someone who, as soon as this finishes, I'm going to watch England decimate in the World Cup. And I apologize for that. And I'm merely human, but and if they don't, they're going back to England. So if you don't follow football, I apologize, but that is at the forefront of my mind, even as I'm talking. So can you have a kind of patriotic love that is not that kind of exclusive thing? Then the second thing that I would change in that, in the book, is I would expand and clarify my ethical framework, preferring a synthesis of virtue ethics and ethical principlism. In the original book, it was really at that time my interest was in virtue ethics. And I asked the question, okay, if we develop the virtues of love, which is what Shanti's working with, what would that look like? And I used something like Kierkegaard's work of love. And I worked at that time with the 4 prima facie principles of beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, justice, which you'll recognize from biomedical ethics. But since then, my thinking has developed, and I have another book besides the Tai Chi book, which is coming out in July. This book is in a series on moral philosophy with De Groot to Brill, which will be out next year. Pragmatic ethical principlism, a new approach to ethics. And in that book, I develop 7 principles. Seek the well-being of all concerned, minimize harm, act fairly, repair that which is broken, respect personhood and bodily integrity, make room for growth and character development, and honor relational commitments and community agreements. And if you're an ethicist, you'll hear echoes of lots of different ways of thinking ethically in there. So what I ask myself now is virtue ethics sufficient? I think virtue ethics is necessary, but I don't think it's sufficient for a well-rounded ethical approach. Why did I suggest 12 virtues of love rather than 10 or 15 or 20? What criteria did I use to determine their inclusion or exclusion? Are the virtues all in the same sense, or do they contain a mixture of different kinds of moral concepts? And I'd want to work a bit more with that. So, for example, courage, moderation, thankfulness appear to fit quite comfortably within traditional virtue theory, but others don't. They look more like practices rather than virtues. So I wouldn't reject that list, the list that Shanti's working with, but I would rather suggest a richness of the list may point towards an important insight that the virtues are not adequate on their own. They need to be supported by ethical principles. Just looking at my notes, I'm going to miss that whole pile out because I want to give time for questions. So the deeper philosophical question remains open. What combination of virtues, principles, practices, relationships, and attention to consequences best capture the moral reality we call love, and for Shanti in her terms, would be part of that moral third? My own view is that virtues, principles need one another. Virtues tell us what sort of people we should become. Principles help us guide action when difficult decisions must be made. The loving, virtuous person still faces practical questions. What does love require in this situation? What does fairness demand in this situation? In that sense, I would want to supplement Shanti's account with some of my later work on ethical principlism, as well as the earlier work on virtue theory. Now, none of this diminishes my appreciation for Shanti's paper, quite the opposite. I think the highest compliment I could say is that the paper prompted me to revisit my own work, to think again about questions that continue to matter. And it demonstrates how philosophical ideas can evolve when placed in conversation with practice. And so for that reason, I regard this ongoing paper of Shanti's and hopefully a book as an important creative contribution to philosophical counseling and practice, take in the concepts of love beyond abstraction and asking how love might function in real human relationships. And so I think that's all I wanted to say. I think it's good. I think it's philosophy doing what it does best in helping people. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, both of you. Thank you. This has been really interesting to see the interaction between the pair of you. Congratulations, Shanti. Will you be a visiting scholar in situ, or are you physically going to be in Cortland at any point?
Yeah, I'm going back several times during the year,
Good. Well, do let me know because it's only 3 hours, from my home. So I would love to come up and see you both again. I have a good excuse now. I haven't seen Andy for too long, but Andy's been back and forth, to annual meetings in Manhattan over the years and so forth. So very impressive, and I'm glad. I mean, Andy, what author? Has not wanted to revisit his book 10 years on. There's always a good
Yeah.
reason to do that. But I'd be interested to read, since you're so prolific, yet another book on just parenting, because you also, if I may disclose, have been a foster parent many times over and have a lot to say about that, no doubt. So I think it would be
Mhm.
great to have an update from you on the parenting side. On the football
Okay.
side, I'm thrilled that you're rooting for England. I'm so touched
England,
by this.
Panama.
I
Yeah.
think it's very telling that after all these years in the U.S., you haven't lost your delightful Liverpudlian accent. You always remind me of the Beatles when I hear you speak. I love it. And you also make guitars on the side as if you haven't enough to do. So
Mhm.
that's always good, but that you're still rooting for England. This tells us something interesting about our formative years. Maybe the
It does.
Jesuits were right about that. Yeah. I
Yeah.
but good stuff. I would love to open the floor. We have some very, very wonderful participants, of course, who've been with us and all day long. Suzanne, okay, and then Alexandra. Okay, Suzanne, please unmute and go ahead.
Thank you, Shanti and Andrew. I really liked how your call and response to each other and the teamwork in this presentation. My questions, my current inquiry is around intellectual companionship. So I listened through that lens, like, oh, could a third space also be an intellectual? Could that third space also be an intellectual third space? Or could it be an aesthetic third space? Or would they be all underpinned as a moral third space? So, if either of you could speak to that or both. Thank you.
Sure, that's a really good question. And so Jessica Benjamin is a psychoanalyst, and so her idea of the third really started with the relationship between the mother and the infant, right? That dynamic where you see the films, right, where the mother's smiling and then the baby smiles, and then, and they have this little dance that they do. And so throughout life, there are a multitude of different kinds of thirds, romantic, third, that's another one. And yeah, intellectual third. But what she does is say that the highest one is the moral third. So all of them kind of ultimately are subsumed under the moral third because all of them would ultimately require an ethical or virtuous approach in that third space.
Yeah, I'm going to leave that to Shanti. This is her thing.
Okay. Is that okay? Is that all right for you, Suzanne? Does that work for you as a response? It does. Okay. So,
Thank you.
Alexandra, nice to see you. Please
Ah,
go ahead and unmute if you are.
yes. Hi, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. I have so many questions. So I'll say that my background is in the enactive approach. So a lot of things kind of resonated with participatory sense making, and kind of dynamical systems and the emergence of this kind of shared space and interpersonal space. There was one thing that you said, Shanti, that I would like to hear more about, which was um, that this restoring the moral third will restore agency. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about what you had in mind with that of why why that would lead to an increase of agency. I also work in philosophy of psychiatry and look a lot at diminishing agency. So that like was really interesting to me. So yeah, a little bit more about the agency. And then Andrew, you mentioned Iris Murdoch and yeah, this notion of love and attention. And at least when I read some of her work, I think that like her normative claims are kind of grounded in God or some kind of grounding of these ideals. And so I'm curious if you have something else to replace that or if it shares a similar kind of normative ground. Thank you.
So I think one of the ways that I see the moral third restoring agency is even with this couple. So once you can get off of like, this is my personal opinion and this is how I feel and how do you feel and my feelings are more right. And you get into explaining that there are virtues that make up love, and then the person chooses. They have to choose that moral position. And instead of reacting to the other person, they say, okay, I might not always like that my partner goes on and on neurotically about a particular subject, but instead of being impatient, I'm going to have agency and I'm going to love her and become more patient. And I'm going to feel good about myself because I am enacting an ethical, position. And in fact, after I worked with this client, I'd seen him for 4 years. And after I gave him this intervention I have a questionnaire and I gave him a sample dialogue. And I think we had 4 more sessions. And because it gave him so much agency in the relationship and ability to talk to his partner, because now he had a leg to stand on that he could support. He was a philosophy and psychology major, so he had some background for that. But he terminated, very shortly after that. And he was confident in himself in the relationship in a way he hadn't been before. And so, I felt closer to lose like, okay, 3 sessions, teach him virtue and get him out of here. I thought, wow, I'm succeeding. I gave them the virtuous way to do it. And they just got out of there, and they've been doing very well since. So I'm pleased.
That's great, Shanti. I can't forbear from adding the leg he had to stand on was not the one he cut off in the dream, evidently. But that aside, may I take this opportunity also to introduce Alexandra to Michelle Magnus, who's in the room. Alexandra's based at UBC, and Michelle has relocated from Alberta to BC. I think maybe you're on the island now, Michelle. I don't know, but anyway, you two should talk to each other, okay? Because you're in the same area, same beautiful province, and probably there are overarching issues dealing with practice and other matters that you might want to consult with each other about, okay? So be introduced. Vana, please unmute.
We didn't do Andy. Andy didn't get to do the Iris.
Oh, Andy didn't get to respond to Alexandra yet. Yeah, Andy,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I love Iris Murdoch. She's one of my probably 2 favorite philosophers with Mary Midgley. She is, as my reading of her, is she is a moral realist. She actually thinks that the good exists. And it's not something that is constructed. It's something which is discovered, and it's discovered through attention. And she makes this claim that the good and love are about the same. I like that approach. And she doesn't see this as God. She is not, she thinks something like the way that God has been approached historically, which she sees as love and the good. And that's got some plausibility to me, some coherence, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew, for that response. So let's invite Vana to unmute.
Yes. It's a very interesting presentation. Thank you very much for both of you. I liked what you had to say, Andy, about supplementing virtue theory with principles. I like that in a variety of different contexts. Shanti, my hat's off to you. I can work with criminals and I can work with psychiatric cases, but I can't work with couples. It always ends up in a disaster. So I wanted to know, the virtues that you're trying to inculcate, it seems to me would take a great deal of practice and a great deal of time before these were actually internalized. And so I'm wondering how long it takes for developing this third, which obviously I have not developed in the few times that I've tried to counsel couples.
Honestly, Rana, before I had this moral third, I didn't want to counsel couples either. I really didn't, because it always got into that, do or done to dynamic and I didn't know really how to get them out of it. Who was right? I mean, so I'm working with a couple right now, and we have a contract for 3 sessions. So I gave them the questionnaire. They filled it out, and they're in the article that will come out in the Abbot Journal. And Appendix A is the questionnaire that I developed. So I gave them both the questionnaire. They answered it, thought about it. Then we met, and so we went through each virtue, and each person, like, okay, what do you think fairness looks like in the relationship? How do you think you're not being fair? How do you think you are being fair? How can we increase the fairness in the relationship? So we've systematically gone through it. Through 3 sessions, we've systematically gone through each virtue and what it is and how they're not doing it or are doing it well and how they can do it better. And at the end, this is an intelligent couple, and they're not starting at ground zero with ethical principles. So, and they're eager they see the value. They've already seen that, they feel better being patient and being fair than, asserting their own egos. So, that's one example how I've done it is in this 3-session model going through each virtues.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Obviously, there has to be goodwill there to start out with.
Yeah.
Okay, with the couples I dealt with, there was definitely not goodwill. Okay.
Another couple that I work with individuals, like the couple through an individual too. So one couple I'm working with through the individual, she's like 78 and he's 86, and he's a retired professor, and he has his he was head of the department. He knows, he tells people what he wants done and how he wants done. And this woman is much more assertive than that. She's had her own career and everything. She's not just a housewife like his former wife who's passed away. So, it's been really great to have this intellectual, format to give to him that, he wants something that he can respect, that isn't threatening to his ego, but is something that he can, virtuously work towards because he understands that as part of his kind of, one part of his academic background. So that's another place where it's been working well, though I haven't seen him. I see her, and she takes the questionnaire, and they sit down and have conversations over dinner together and discuss these virtues, and then I keep prompting her.
Okay,
that's great. Thank you so much for that, Vona, and for the response. We're running a little short on time. We're going to have 2 more questions. One from Patricia. Please be brief. Patricia, ask the question, and we'll get responses from one or both, and then
Okay.
Rick.
Can you hear me?
Indeed, we can.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, thanks a lot for your presentation. I really enjoyed Shanti's presentation, really, and also the words by Andrew regarding his rethinking of the concept of love. And I think that this concept of moral third and the theme of choice and recognition that you, Shanti, put in the heart, in the focus, if I correctly understood, as well as love in a wider sense by Andrew, I think that can be also used because I'm working on that now in this period. I'm going back from the prison in Padua, in a concept of reparative justice, which now in Italy is very, very strong, which means rebuild the relationship between the criminal and the offended person. And it's a question of recognition, of choice, of peace, it's not easy. It's a quite long process, but philosophical counseling now is much used in this concept of repairing justice, which now is developing, is very strong in Italy. There is a colleague of mine in Milan who is Vittorio Ceretti, who is working on this. And there is a couple, the offended and the criminal, and the family all around, of course, because they are all involved. And the dialogue and the ethic choice to go and to rebuild the relationship, the broken relationship, which means healing and transforming the people. So it's a really revolutionary concept, which go behind the punishment or the imprisonment. It look forward in a new way. And of course, it has to do with love, but with choice, with a rational love, which is not just effective, because that's a difficult one. But you pass from hate and the victim to people interfacing together and rebuilding the relationship, which is very, very. So I think can be inspiring. I mean, I've been inspired by you and also by the concept of love. So justice is a very big field where to apply your moral third concept and the love concept by Andrew. I think justice is the big container now.
Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Yeah, just one brief comment, Patricia. In my new work, two of the ethical principles are fairness and repair, which is very much in that realm you were just talking about. And I see those as expressions of love.
Yeah.
So not affective love, not sentimental love, but certainly what love looks like in practice. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Yes, thanks a lot. I agree totally. So thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Patricia. That's really interesting. And as you say, a tremendous amount of potential if philosophers don't have enough to do and they want to get involved in the justice sector. We certainly have potential there. Thank you very much for that. Rick, please go ahead.
I'll be quick. No question. I just wanted to plug the journal because Shanti's paper today was just a teaser for a much more elaborate account. She mentioned an appendix. There's so much more in that paper. I highly encourage it if you like this presentation. The paper is 3 times at least richer.
Well,
You squeezed an awful lot into the really core insights in 15 minutes or whatever it was, Shanti. Excellent work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Rick.
Andrew.
But we're going to ask for everyone to remember the other virtue, patience, and because we have, fortunately for the journal, a fairly healthy publication queue. And the next issue, as mentioned earlier today, will be, or at least is foreseen to be, a special issue on a conference in South Africa on philosophical counseling on the African continent, which I'm sure is going to be interesting for all of us. But then in the subsequent issue will be March 2027, believe it or not. The papers from this annual meeting will begin to appear, including, of course, Shanti's. And then maybe we can bundle your response, Andrew, with that as well, or carry it forward for continuity. But anyway, Rick, thank you for plugging the journal. I think you're preaching to the choir here, but that's great. Okay, once again, both of you, tremendously interesting work that you're doing, and I will look forward to maybe we'll have lunch together in Cortland when you get there, Shanti, as your visiting position will entail. And once again, congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
More than welcome.